We're just waiting for the last few folks in our waiting room to completely join us this afternoon. We are past the noon hour in Mountain Time, so for those of you in other time zones, we appreciate you joining us, but we're just tipping into afternoon now. So good afternoon. Thank you for joining the second session of our virtual summer convention. We typically would travel for this event and host a convention somewhere in another venue that is not the Utah Law and Justice Center. But for those of you who are aware of our constant need to adapt and to provide service for a variety of different kinds of lawyers and different lawyers throughout the state of Utah, as well as the Utah licensees who live and practice all around the United States, we decided to hold this 2023 summer convention virtually. So that's what facilitates our conversation today. We appreciate so many of you registering to join us. We anticipate that number growing as the hour proceeds, and we will host 13 more sessions beyond today, every Thursday at 12 noon Mountain Time, all the way through the month of August. Hoping just to catch everyone all throughout the summer, regardless of our travels and our different adventures through the summertime. And we also wanted to try to reach so many practitioners around the state. So I'm just appreciative of seeing new lawyers, mid-career practitioners, veteran practitioners, members of our bench are joining us, which we're so thrilled to see. We're also just excited to see a great cross-section of who constitutes lawyers in Utah. You work in all walks of legal life, and you work in a variety of different organizations, and I just want to pay a bit of respect to the fact that you're joining us from so many different places in your lawyering and so many different clients served. That is indeed part of the diversity we're celebrating in today's conversation. So thank you for joining us. I want to thank Euclid and Inclusion Strategies. They are our co-sponsors for today's CLE. They have been hosting this four-part CLE discussion, part of which is taking place in our summer convention. I also want to thank Ross Romero, who's dedicated a volume of time not only assembling our distinguished panel for today, but drafting questions and being very thoughtful and purposeful in the design of these CLEs. And we just appreciate his expertise and his willingness to share not only his lived experience, but certainly his leadership and stewardship of these conversations in our legal community. We thank him for being the moderator today. And we also have three sponsors from Euclid, Ray, Quinney, and Nebeker, Buchalter, and SF Firm, who are part of our sponsorship of certified law firms who are helping us endeavor in these inclusion and belonging conversations. So we thank them. There will be some materials being sent to you both in the chat as well as with your certificates of attendance, so don't hesitate to check those things out. I will turn the time over as we have a really wonderful agenda and a distinguished faculty assembled today. We're going to have a very dynamic conversation, so I invite all of you to participate with us in the chat if you're inclined. Please don't hesitate to post a question or a comment. We'll be trying to facilitate those and getting to those throughout our time together today. And again, we thank you for your attendance and your support of these conversations in our legal community. Ross, I'll turn the time to you. Thanks to everyone. Have a good discussion.
Thank you very much. We certainly appreciate the support of the bar and Euclid and the faculty that joined us here today. As we noted, this is going to be a discussion about the Utah legal community and where we are in this diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging conversation. What are our offices doing? How could we do better? And what are we seeing? And so it's meant to be collaborative. We will have a conversation where the panelists will introduce themselves, introduce their offices and their work. I then have some questions for them. And we also invite the audience to be thinking about questions that we will be taking from the chat. So very much want to be responsive to those. I'll also invite you, if you're so inclined, to turn on your cameras and let us see your smiling faces. It's sometimes helpful as we have these conversations to know that there are people out there engaging in this, and it helps us also with raise of hands and other things sometimes we see. Let me introduce our panel. Mary Ann Davies is a supervising attorney with the Disability Law Center, and really are asking her to be particularly attentive to some of the conversations going on around reasonable accommodations for those clients that her office serves, what it means for lawyers in this context too, right? How can we be accommodating to our fellow colleagues in needing accommodations? And so really excited to have her voice. And I'll just say, I've asked the panelists to also introduce themselves a little more fully as we proceed, but also wanted to make sure you knew on our panel is Phyllis Wan, and she's the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for Holland and Hart. If you will get to hear from her, you'll see the depth and length of her experience in this work. She comes to us out of Denver, and just with a wealth of knowledge, really practical applications, obviously is applicable to a little bit larger firm. They operate in multi-states, and so have a different perspective in that way. Next, we're going to hear from Misty Hope, and she's the Deputy Juab County Attorney. I think she's in her 3rd or 4th year of practice, also was in Utah County. And what does it mean in the government space, local government space? What's going on there? Also bringing a little bit of a rural perspective to the conversation. So I think that will be helpful. And finally, we're going to hear from Paul Taylor, a shareholder with Ray, Quinney, and Nebeker, works in the patent law space. Obviously can be a little bit challenging relative to having diversity in that particular profession and legal application. But I suspect there are clients that are utilizing these sophisticated services that are also leaning on the firm to engage in these efforts. And so it'll be helpful to hear from them. So maybe in that order, if we might have Mary Ann Davies introduce herself and what she's working on.
Yes. Hello. Thank you, Ross. And thank you for having me here today. I'm very happy to speak with everyone. Yes, my name is Mary Ann, and I work at the Disability Law Center. I've been at the Disability Law Center for 9 years now. And my practice area focuses on employment discrimination, as well as discrimination within the provision of public services. So our agency, just to give you a little bit of background, we are a private nonprofit law firm. We are also what's called the Protection Advocacy Agency for the state of Utah. So that actually means we have some special federal funding and federal statutory authority to go into facilities where people with disabilities are receiving treatment to make sure that they are free from abuse and neglect and receiving appropriate services. We do not do Social Security disability applications. Our practice is solely on civil litigation, primarily under the ADA and sometimes related constitutional claims or special education claims, but our focus is on discrimination under the ADA. So I think just to kick off in terms of talking about my own office and some of our inclusion efforts, I did want to focus on our inclusion efforts around disability. And I think there's really a couple ways you can look at inclusion efforts for disability. There are certainly the legal requirements under the ADA. And I'm more than happy to talk more about those and what those legal requirements are. We do have a series of videos on our website about reasonable accommodations, such as, working from home, reassignment, leave. We have a video on there that we did in partnership with Bob Corsi about, from kind of what are reasonable accommodations from an employer's perspective. They are all very helpful. But also, I think there are things you can do to be more inclusive of people with disabilities that don't necessarily require people to, self-identify or ask for formal accommodation. So for example, in our office, we do have a hybrid work model. We are very flexible on that. Also with the individuals that, I supervise, and for most of our attorneys, we have really flexible schedules. So if somebody needs to be able to, take a doctor's appointment, either for themselves or if they have a loved one with a disability, we're really focused on individuals being able to complete their work and meet their hours. But if that needs to look differently, that's something that we give staff a lot of flexibility on. And we also, the space itself is very physically accessible. We have desks that move up and down to, accommodate individuals if they need a standing desk and they have back pain. Our office space is very easy to manipulate to people's needs. Because we are hybrid, not everybody has an office space. Some people choose to work primarily from home, but we have spaces in our office that are essentially hoteling spaces for people to be able to come in once or twice a month and be able to have, a comfortable place to work. All of our spaces also, we have closed doors for people to be able to kind of minimize, any sort of other sensory input. We've also looked at our policies that we offer in terms of our health benefits. And just last year, we started offering, in addition to our regular healthcare plan, an HSA, which is a high deductible plan. However, if you're someone who requires like a lot of health services up front, if you get through your deductible, then you have 100% co-insurance. And that actually works a lot better for some people with chronic conditions. And HSA also allows people to use those monies to do things like mental health services. A lot of those actually don't accept insurance, but you can pay for those things with an HSA. So we have tried to look carefully at our benefits. We now offer, we offer paternity leave, but we also offer, leave, and we have basically like a PTO bank, so that if somebody, we have had situations where somebody either themselves or their loved one had a really difficult health situation. And so we were able to provide some assistance. Certainly there are the legal requirements in terms of reasonable accommodations, FMLA. You can grant leave beyond the FMLA. Actually, you have to do an analysis as to whether or not that would be reasonable. But there's lots of things you can do within the office to make the space a lot more comfortable for people. And, I've had multiple people who have said to me, either they themselves have a disability or or often a lot of our staff have family members with disabilities, and they have said, I couldn't work full time if I didn't have like all the flexibility that you offer. And our staff works incredibly hard. Reasonable accommodations under the law, when you're granting an ADA accommodation, it is not a special benefit or privilege. It is something that is required to provide equal access to your employees. And allow them to complete the essential functions of the job. It's not for them to have something special. It's so that they can perform the essential functions. And that's really how we approach our work. Our attorneys put in way more than, the 40 hours you may be thinking of for a nonprofit law firm. We work really hard. We've brought a lot of cases. We've done class actions. We are a very serious law firm. And we provide this flexibility, and our staff, they really thrive. And it's really great to have, and just really a privilege to work with everyone and know that, we're supporting them.
Thank you. That was wonderful and very helpful. I'll just add, for all the practitioners, I think we're going to see, as workforce continues to get older, people are working longer, people are living longer, and for financial reasons, they may be working longer. We're going to see more disability realizations and claims and accommodation requests. And so it's a really important topic for us to be concentrating on as legal counsel into the future. Phyllis.
Thank you. And thank you, Marianne. That was great hearing all the things that you're doing. As a lot of people who work in the space know, disability is one of those last protected classes that are coming along in a lot, because people are just hesitant of running afoul of ADA and what do they have to do and how do we have to manage that. So it's great to hear all the things that you're doing. So as Ross said, I'm Phyllis Wan. I'm Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. A little bit about my background, which will kind of give you a picture of where a lot of our initiatives come from and perspectives that we have. I was a practicing lawyer for 28 years. I born, raised, hailed from Manhattan, New York, and moved out to Denver, Colorado. It has now been 30 years ago exactly. So it was interesting transition from a diversity standpoint, coming from New York into Denver in the mid-90s. It's obviously very different now. But I was a litigator for 5 years, and then I did television programming and entertainment at Hogan levels for the last 21 years of it. And when I moved to Denver, I realized that there was, like in Salt Lake and Chicago and many other cities, there is diversity in our populations, but oftentimes you don't see them in the halls of the law firms or in the accounting firms or downtown in the professions. And so I got very involved in our diversity initiatives at the firm as well as in the community. I practiced half of that time, the last 8 years of my practice, I was Deputy Chief Diversity Officer for Hogan of the U.S. offices. So I traveled around like I do now at Holland and Hart to our different offices, seeing different geographic nuances, right, for each of our offices. They could be small, they could be in Billings or Boise, they could be in DC. Diversity is obviously very different in all of those cities, from Denver, from Salt Lake. And so I think it gave me that perspective, including on the global side. I did go in-house for a short stint to 2 clients that merged, Time Warner Cable and Charter Communications, and did that to get them through the post-merger before they moved to Connecticut and decided I wanted to do DEI full-time. So I came to Holland and Hart after being the interim executive director of the Center for Legal Inclusiveness, which is somewhat like Euclid here. And so I have that perspective of also catering to and helping not only law firms, big, small, medium, but also a lot of government agencies, the AG's office, U.S. Attorney's office, city attorney's offices, in-house corporations. A lot of corporations are members of the Center for Legal Inclusiveness. Their needs are completely different from law firms and for government agencies. And so it was great to have that experience and that background before going to Holland and Hart 3 years ago. So when I came to Holland and Hart, I did come because I knew that it was a firm that not only walked the walk, but also implemented some of the things that they were doing and were showing results in the DEI space, because I had been in the community with them for 25 years. I had known what they had been doing. For those of you who don't know the firm nationally, we are about 480 lawyers. A lot of them, half of them, probably a little more, are in Colorado. But Salt Lake City is our second largest office by attorney count. It has about 75 attorneys. So again, and then we can go down as small as some offices with 6 attorneys. And so it gives us a different perspective on how to manage that, because it's completely different in how you approach retention as well as inclusion in a small office than an office with 500 people. And so from the moment I got there, we have a phenomenal recruiting team that does a great job of bringing diverse lawyers and business service professionals, what we call our staff, to make sure that they not only have that experience when they just walk in the door and they get here, but they continue to be their authentic selves, that they can continue to feel included and belong, like they belong. And that's what I focus on, is that retention and that inclusion piece, whether that's through some of our initiatives for our lawyers, such as our diversity lieutenants for all of our practice groups, which I can delve into a little bit more. We have a 25-hour DEI requirement for all lawyers, because we know that diversity and inclusion is not just the work of myself and the people on this call, but every single person in the firm has to pitch in. And we have many initiatives. Most importantly, a lot of the work that we do and the policies that we have are not just on paper. They're just not fancy things that we say on our website, but that management helps us with, and policies that get implemented and get pushed down regularly. Because if you don't have that, you're not going to get the buy-in of every single person that you need. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about some of the initiatives we have and some of the partnerships we have. I focus a lot on community partnerships, as well as partnerships with our clients and business contacts, because we don't live in a silo. And we know that as the legal profession becomes more global and becomes less reliant on geographic boundaries, we need to have those connections with others.
Yes, Phyllis, thank you for that background, and certainly have a lot of experience in this space. So we do look forward to hearing more. Misty, mind introducing yourself and talk about what your office is working on?
Sure, no problem. Thanks for having me here. I appreciate it. I'm kind of a baby attorney. Like Ross stated, I'm going into my 4th year, so it's nice to have Marianne and Phyllis and Paul. You have a lot more experience than I do. I actually decided to go to law school late in life, and my kids were all in school. I have 5 kids, and so that's what I've done. I'm from Georgia, so if you hear a little bit of an accent, I grew up in South Georgia and played basketball there. I went to a high school that was 50-50 whites and blacks, and I had great experience there. I've actually done the training that Harvard offers, an online unconscious bias training, and it actually says I prefer Black people a little bit more than white people. And so that I miss that diversity. I miss those people out here in Utah. We've been out here for about 8 years. And as far as the office that I'm in, I originally started out in Utah County. It's an attorney's office that has quite a few attorneys in it. I believe it's around 35 attorneys for a government county office, 2nd largest in Utah after Salt Lake. I was there for a bit, a couple years, and then I came down to Juab, which you don't know where that is. It's in Nephi. It's south of Utah County. I still live in Utah County, so I commute. But I love it down here. We're tiny, and there's only 3 attorneys here. So we do everything. We do civil and criminal. And we have 5 support staff in our office. One of the things that when I first came here, I was assigned to do the Euclid inclusion and make sure that we were certifying. I think we're one of the few offices, government offices that certify with Euclid. And it's something I think that it was Anne Marie Howard that thought that that was important. I don't know how many of you know her, but she really thought that was important here, that we are paying attention to those things. And it's been fantastic. I've really enjoyed it. Some of the things that we have implemented since I've been here is we have added team meetings where everybody comes to the team meetings. The office is closed for an hour. We actually just finished our team meeting before I jumped on here. We're all in there, open floor. Everybody has the opportunity to speak. And one of the things I really like about this office is that we value our staff. The attorneys aren't better than them, right? We're all equals. We all work together. It's a teamwork. Nothing gets done without the staff. And so we really try to value them and have that equality as far as voice, that they can let us know if they need something or what needs to be done. So that was what we implemented last year. This year, we've kind of implemented 2 new things in the office. One is quarterly check-ins with the county attorney. So there's just a 15-minute scheduled meeting quarterly where you go in and you check in. You're able to kind of tell him just one-on-one what's going on. If there are things that you need, if there are concerns that you have in the office, and he always asks, what can I do better? And we really appreciate our county attorney down here. He does a fantastic job, and he really cares about the employees in the office. The other thing that we just implemented this last week was we just talked about is how full is your bucket? So this is one of the things. It's a book based out of, it's a Gallup book that is done. It's focused on positive psychology. It's all about making sure you're pointing out the good things that people are doing and giving them kudos for those good things. And it talks about the increase in just work product with people that feel like they're noticed, they're recognized. And so that's something that we've started, and I'm really excited about that. Things that we're looking forward to doing in the future are doing some unconscious bias training, making sure that we're aware of that. It's a different field down here, definitely in Nephi, but you know, we're trying to make sure that there are the opportunities for people that want to work, and they have the opportunity to be flexible. We are flexible down here. We're able to do our work hours, some from home, some in the office. and we're able to mix it up. We actually work 4/10s, but if that doesn't work for you, then you're able to do Fridays or do some of, if you need to take Monday off. So it's a great office, and I really appreciate our county attorney and what he's done to make that office better.
It's really great to hear the certification through Euclid and the importance of that. I also want to echo working as a team. I know how important, paralegals are and the assistants that work with us, and we really notice them when we're getting ready for trial or other times, but they really are an integral part of an office. And so I'm glad to hear that collaboration. Paul, do you mind introducing yourself and what Ray Quinney's working on?
You bet. So I guess I'm somewhat different in this group in that my firm, so I'm not a member, I'm not the managing partner, I'm not on the board of directors, I'm not in a DEI group. Ray Quinney actually is a great firm that does a ton of work in the diversity area that I joined about 6 years ago. So my insight is a little bit of a different insight. My background, I'm a patent attorney, and to become a patent attorney, you have to be able to qualify to take this extra bar exam, which requires that you have, an engineering degree or a hard science degree. And so it narrows down the pool of candidates immediately. And we've noticed, one of the things that we've noticed in Utah is a struggle to get more diverse folks into STEM. And so we've come up with some different approaches that we've tried to do in our group. Like I said, Ray Quinney is already very diverse ahead of us. I guess we were adding to diversity by adding people that could do math or something. I don't know. But they are fantastic and supportive of us, and we've come up with new strategies and ways to bring in, to broaden our pool. So we actually have we've hired attorneys from out of state that actually work for us remotely. So we found some fantastic diverse candidates that were looking to join our team and not wanting to be in Utah. And so we've been able to set up, I guess, remote offices. The firm was really supportive of us helping to bring in people with these technical degrees that don't live here. So it's an area that's been a little bit difficult, but a little bit higher degree of difficulty, I would say, because of the STEM requirements. But we've been able to see a lot of success in that area by broadening our reach beyond the state of Utah, and then also we're doing a lot of mentoring, trying to encourage more people into STEM and from STEM into law school, and then hopefully to our firm as well. So it's been fun to kind of be in that different spot and try to fill that role. So.
That's fantastic, and appreciate. In fact, Ray Quinney is doing a lot in this space in the local market, and really lending its voice and expertise. Let's start off with a question relative to gender inclusion. We have focused on this challenge in Utah. It's certainly part of the Women's Leadership Institute in a context outside of law. But we have women lawyers. That's a lead organization. There's been obviously some task forces and study about how we can do better. And it also lends, I think, to this patent application, right? It tends not to have as much diversity, and gender included. So tell me, what have you seen that's been happening recently? What are maybe some things we can learn to do better? And some suggestions on trying to make sure we're being as inclusive in the gender space that maybe we haven't been thinking about in the past, and what could we be doing differently to continue to work on that? We see law schools that are about 50-50 now, and we see even in Utah, I think slightly more women than men, but it's not staying through professional ranks, right? There are not as many senior women partners or leaders of county attorney offices and some other places. So what could we be doing better or different? Phyllis, do you mind starting us off there?
Sure. It's interesting because so many of the diversity initiatives, I think when they began, really did focus on gender diversity. And I think that as a legal profession, we've been lagging a little bit as we've been focused, I think, on racial, ethnic, LGBT, disability, diversity. And I think it's because some of our initiatives have focused less on the individual and their career path and their progression. So as you say, oftentimes women come into firms, they're doing a great job, they're putting their head down, and it's the professional development part, the client development, the business development, or the getting into the C-suite part where we're challenged because they don't have necessarily a room at the table, or they're not being brought along. And so we're focused on sponsorship because we really do feel that it's more than a passive arrangement that is needed to help some of our women lawyers, particularly the younger ones. Oftentimes we find that women, like diverse lawyers, are more likely to leave in that mid-associate, that 3 to 5 years out. Oftentimes are leaving to find something else. And oftentimes people will say, well, they went in-house, they went to the government, they went somewhere else. It was a great job, but why? Why did they leave, right? Why did they choose? Because they didn't necessarily see that future or that path. So for us, it's important. We have supervisors. Every single one of our attorneys have a supervisor who monitors their work. That we have partner mentors, but we also have others we have a women's initiative. It's called the Women's Forum. It's a national organization, but for instance, Salt Lake has a really active women's group in Holland and Hart that has taken it upon themselves to mentor each and every one of our associates and our counsel, taking them on as informal mentors to help them. On the sponsorship side, we're creating groups that look out for our young women lawyers and say, how are they doing? What, not only are they getting the billable work, but what kind of work are they getting? What kind of quality experiences are they getting? And most importantly, we're measuring and tracking, not just on racial, ethnic, LGBT diversity, but our gender numbers. Who are we hiring? Who's leaving? Where are they going? Why are they going? All of those things give us information. But I think that the most important part, in addition to that mentorship and sponsorship, is making sure there are those opportunities for them in the community to raise their profile. There are a lot of different things that we do to support them in our professional development program.
And Ross, just to add, I think everything Phil said is wonderful. And I think those things are so important to track and ensure that, women in the workplace, that it just so happens our office is a majority women, including some of the supervising attorneys. So, I'm not sure kind of why that has all played out, but it is really important for women to be able to get, FaceTime with supervisors, with, partners. I will say I've had some really wonderful male colleagues who at times kind of recognize things that are difficult for women in in our profession. And it's always really appreciated to have that support from somebody who's an ally to say, hey, like they just mansplained you. Or, I've had situations where I'm sure many people have, being a young female attorney, that sometimes you're mistaken for, support staff or something. But I just also wanted to add, in addition to those things, I think there's some really practical things under the ADA for firms to consider. And this is specifically around things like pregnancy and motherhood. I think those are a lot of situations in which women may need to take time just very practically for health needs. And, just to, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar, but to qualify for ADA protections, a disability is considered a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more life activities, major life activities. And major life activities include things such as working, standing, activities of daily living, interacting, speaking, sleeping, thinking. It's a really broad definition. And, if you have someone who's pregnant who happens to be experiencing a lot of health difficulties, they probably do qualify for ADA accommodations. So just in terms of like what those accommodations could look like, I mentioned leave. Leave is a really big thing that comes up, and I find employers confuse leave and FMLA obligations all the time. So you can take FMLA, you know, if you're a qualifying entity, those 12 weeks of job protected leave, assuming you meet the hour requirements. But individuals can also ask for leave beyond FMLA as a reasonable accommodation. And, you know, that's something that, you know, when people make these requests, you know, that triggers what's called the interactive process, where you should engage with that individual and talk to them about the request, how it would work. I know in my own experience, I had numerous health complications with my delivery. And so I did take more time beyond my 12 weeks. And I was able to, you know, take some more time, but also when I came back, I eased into the position. I came back part-time building to full-time, and other women in my office have done that. You know, it wasn't necessarily a disability related reason, but they did that because that's what worked for them. So, you know, there are options to offer, you know, young women, to let them know you don't have to have a baby and immediately be back several weeks after. You can have people ease into the position. And, you know, I did that. And when I came back, I jumped right into depositions. We did a 3-day fair hearing on one of our class actions. I think I was probably the first woman to ask for a pumping room at the federal courthouse because there was none at the time. So, you know, there are things that can be done practically for women to make it so that they don't have to be choosing between their job or, you know, going through pregnancy and new motherhood.
Yeah, Marianne, that's a good point. And one thing I do want to mention is well beyond, right? Because FMLA only guarantees that unpaid leave, it's not the paid. And so, for instance, we have been trying to remain competitive. We were very much ahead of the game in many aspects, providing up to 17 weeks. And ours is gender neutral. It's more primary care, particularly that's for LGBT community as well as for our men, right? Our young men, they want to be home as well. So it's a gender neutral parental leave, primary care versus secondary care. We also have, and I think what's really important is the on-ramp and the off-ramp. And that's something that we instituted, which is we understand, any of us who have been practicing, like you said, it takes a while. First of all, when you know you're going out, everyone stops giving you work, right? And you have to wind down. And so we understand that. And so we automatically, depending on the length of your leave, your ramp, your on-ramp and your off-ramp is longer, right? So the longer you take leave, the longer it's going to take you to get back into a full pace. And you're also going to be adjusting. So it can be upwards. Our on-ramp is a 50% on-ramp for those weeks leading up to 8 weeks, depending on how long your leave is on the front end and the back end. And that takes that benefits like that, things like that people don't necessarily think of, you know, that makes all the difference in the world in terms of people who decide, I want to stay here. This is something that I feel that really supports me in my family life as well.
Misty, did you want to weigh in on this, or Paul?
After you.
So as far as women in the workplace, you know, I think one of the things that we're planning on doing is the unconscious bias training. I think a lot of it is we just aren't aware, right? I had a situation in my last position where there was a group of male prosecutors. I think there were 4 or 5 of them. They were in an office talking. And so I went in to ask a question, and they were finishing their conversation about a case. And it was a sexual assault case, and they were determining what they would want to do with this case. And they started doing some victim blaming. And I pointed out, you know, those choices have nothing to do with consent. What she did there is not consent. And so that should not even be weighing on your determination. And they were not very happy with me. The one that was leading the conversation looked at all the other male prosecutors and said, we will finish this conversation later. Looked at me and said, what do you want? And so I think it was that they didn't like that I had pointed out something that maybe they just weren't aware of maybe her point of view, her perspective, or what she was doing. And it kind of empowered me a little bit, the importance of female prosecutors in these roles, because women understand these situations that women are in. They understand that kind of the scenario a little bit more, and they're able to give that perspective. And I think that, you know, if these male prosecutors had really realized what was happening, I was just so in shock about what was happening that I didn't bring it to their attention. And if I had been a little bit more in a mindset where I could point it out and say, guys, this is important that we talk about, let's talk about it. I'm willing to talk about this with you and give them a little bit of education. I think it could have had a better outcome. But as far as that, I think that that's what it comes down to. If we can really just help one another understand without getting offended and just say, hey, you know what, this is something that I can bring to the table that you're maybe missing in this conversation, rather than throwing me out of the conversation.
And it's hard for people to push that on someone. I mean, you were brave to do that, but you know, the younger lawyers are not going to do that. And so we need to do that as organizations, as firms, as entities, to continue. It can't just be a one-off unconscious bias once a year. And people go, oh gosh, here we go. Oh yeah. Most people go and they go, yeah, but then they completely forget. Interrupting bias is a nonstop process for all of us. And so for instance, we have unconscious bias checklists. Now, before you fill out an evaluation on any of the associates or counsel attorneys, your landing page is an unconscious bias checklist. Before you fill out that evaluation, that compensation recommendation, anything, you have to say, go through this checklist and go, remember before you fill this out that there are all these biases that you might have and that you need to interrupt. And so that's just one way. So when we do our partner advancement meetings and when we consider, I do an unconscious bias primer for them. Same thing, management compensation. I do an unconscious bias primer before we go into the listing. So it's got to be continuous, right? It can't just be a one-off.
So my contribution here is a little bit different. One of the areas that we're seeing, so we talk about STEM challenges. One of the challenges that we have is that clients, for example, my biggest client's Microsoft, and they're looking for, you know, electrical engineers and computer science majors. And when we get applicants, you know, I would say 80% of the women applicants that we get are biology or chemistry majors. And the client, they're great people, smart people, would be awesome, but the clients aren't looking for that. The clients are looking for somebody with the specific technical degree that they're looking for. You know, a biology or chemistry minor may not have anything to do, or degree may not have anything to do with the artificial intelligence work that we're working on now, or whatever other areas we're in. And one of the things that we've seen clients start to do, as well as the patent office start to do, is soften the requirements, so that if you can find somebody who you can train, I mean, at the end of the day, patent law, like every other area of law, is just an apprenticeship. If you find somebody that maybe doesn't have a background that really matches exactly, but if you can train them and be able to help them to understand the technology area, you know, being able, then those are viable candidates that you can hire. And I think in some ways, kind of expanding that net, and maybe that was a bias at the time, is that every client thought we had to have these particular degrees. But when you try to be a little more pragmatic and think outside the box, you find, you know, a bigger pool of fantastic candidates that you can bring in and help join your firm. So that's one area we've seen some change in. That I guess the principle coming back to it is, yeah, open your mind to other opportunities. What else can work? So
that's a really good observation, right? Asking clients and professions if we can be cultivating this talent in other ways and bringing them along. I think it's also a couple things I heard is the intersectionality that exists, right? There are women of color, there are LGBTQ participants in gender, right? So the important thing to think about is how this affects individuals, right? And what are they experiencing, and what needs might they have to help make them be successful? I also think it's really important to interrupt those bias. It's really hard. And it also means those of you that are senior attorneys, you have the gravitas in offices and in firms to say, wait a minute, let's take a minute and discuss what just happened, because we're not fully getting, you know, all perspectives on this. And victim blaming, particularly in sexual harassment circles, is a big deal. And it's something that I think men have a particular burden to be thinking about more completely. and to be taking feedback from others. And so I just think it's really important. It's harder for a younger attorney to have those conversations. But I would also suggest those are conversations that if they're noted in a law office at a junior level, to bring them to the attention of a more senior partner. And hopefully you'll get some assistance in getting that resolved, because the challenge of it not getting resolved is it tends to perpetuate and it continues. And maybe people think it's okay to tell an off-color joke or to be inappropriate in some way, and it's clearly not, and it is offensive. And so not being confrontational, because sometimes, in fact, most times what I have found is people aren't intending to be offensive, but it does need to be corrected. And so I just think that's an important thing for us to be thinking about and addressing. Well, thank you for that. That's very helpful. Let's talk a little bit about maybe what your offices are doing relative to incentivizing or offering carrots to participate in DE&I efforts. I heard, a 25-hour, I don't know if it's an expectation or an invitation for attorneys. Okay, it's a requirement. So I'd be interested in hearing how that works. Maybe if they're compensated in some way, if it comes out in an evaluation, but let's talk through a little bit about what it looks like to incentivize this work in our different offices. Phyllis, would you mind starting?
Sure. I can start with that. I mean, so it is a 25-hour requirement that we started. Certain of our bars, have now. So for instance, in Colorado, there is a DEI requirement, CLE requirement now in some of the jurisdictions. But we do it because, as I said, we know that we need everyone to be a mentor, everyone to be a sponsor, everyone to bring someone along to a client meeting. And so we do have a 25-hour requirement for all of our lawyers. This actually came out of something called the hackathon from Diversity Lab. They had a hackathon, which was, kind of a think tank weekend where they tried to come up with different ideas. And they realized that women and diverse lawyers tend to do more of what we call the office housework. They get asked to pull together the retreat. They get asked to run the committees. They get asked to do all the different things, or they volunteer. Or obviously, if it's recruiting on the diversity side, you want diverse lawyers, you want women lawyers. And so they get asked to do a lot of it. And so not only do we want to recognize the work that they're doing, but we also wanted to spread it out. So if Marianne is doing 100 hours and Ross is doing 5, guess what, Ross, you're going to get the next call to do something. And so for us, it was important to have that requirement. It is a requirement. It gets taken into consideration at compensation time. There is actually a stick if you don't hit those hours. We also have a 50-hour legal pro bono or 75-hour civic and legal pro bono requirement. And so we take our expectations very seriously because we think we have to give back to the community and we have to ensure the culture that we have. In terms of incentives, we just really encourage people. We explain to them that this is not a zero-sum game. Diversity is not taking something away from one person and giving it to another person. It's growing the pie. It's creating new opportunities. And so we need everyone to pitch in on that. And so we also annually will ask all of our lawyers, not just our diverse or our women, who's made a difference in your life? Who has really gone above and beyond for you? And we collect all of those clients and I provide them to the management. And we take that into consideration for partner as well as associate compensations. We give bonuses for that as well. But mostly I think it's the workplace rewards, right? It's having the opportunity for them to build relationships in the community. As I said, it makes our relationships with our clients much stickier. So many of my clients, I'm sure you've all heard that our clients are just pushing us really hard on DEI. But I like the fact that they're no longer just saying, you know what, we expect you to have a diverse team and we don't care where your offices are. We want a diverse legal team because diverse teams are more innovative and more creative. And we want you to have a diverse team. Well, they're now saying, tell us how we can help. Tell us what we can do. And so we've been using a lot of our client initiative, for instance, whether it's a panel, whether it's a pitch practice, whether it's an opportunity to go to lunch with the women in the legal department of one of our clients. A lot of our clients, plus their legal departments are tiny and they oftentimes don't have opportunities like firms do or in the community, and to come together. Oftentimes they feel siloed from the rest of the legal profession. And so we create these opportunities as incentives because it helps to build client relationships and it helps to give them better experiences in addition to the financial incentives, which always help.
I think that's excellent. And oftentimes it is a carrot and a stick, right? We want to incentivize, but we also want to hold accountability. And so thank you. Anyone else? Well,
I can jump in real quick. Sorry, Ross.
Yeah,
So for us, at least for my group, so not for the firm generally, but for my group, one of the carrots and sticks come from our clients. So Microsoft actually has a program where they encourage us to meet certain requirements of billable hours given to diverse attorneys. So that's sort of the carrot side of, or the stick side of it. From a carrot side, if we meet certain, every year they give us an opportunity to meet different requirements, and they will actually give us a bonus. Like we actually will get a 0.5% of our billings bonus per metric that we make. So sometimes we make them, sometimes we don't. Last year there was a big focus on African American partners, and in our patent group, we currently don't have any African Americans. We're working to mentor a couple of folks to join our team, but it's a way to the clients can be really influential to encourage you to do that. And then the money that we get from Microsoft, we use towards, when we talked about my specific situation where we have, out-of-state attorneys that work remotely, we use that money to pay for their travel costs so they can come out anytime they want to, and encourage them to go. So we have a women's law event, women's law group event every year where we will bring in our out-of-state attorneys and use some of that money to cover those expenses so that it's no net loss, right? So the money just gets diverted back into our diversity efforts and retention efforts. And so getting clients, if there are clients, in this meeting, this is a great opportunity for you to consider ways you can encourage law firms to do this as well. So
We need more Microsofts. Well,
it is true that when our clients and the community asks us to participate in these circles, we tend to look more fully. Maybe a question that I just thought of, and it might apply more to firm life, my past experience, but I would tell clients to think about how to partner with others in your ecosystem, right? So if you have a client that's really working on diversity, equity, and inclusion propositions, and your office is working on that, that is a really good way to build and deepen that relationship. And I think you're seeing that with an example of Microsoft. But I wonder, maybe in county attorneys' offices, I know the state, for instance, has a chief diversity officer, Nubia Pena. I think her title's slightly different than that, but it's really meant to focus on, as a state, what are we doing to ensure that, the participants in Utah and the businesses in state government are being inclusive. And I guess I just wonder, what are ways that you're seeing, even if they're not clients per se, but they're partners, what are you seeing in that partnership client circle that is helping to build that ecosystem?
I can jump in. I'm waiting for that phone. I still have a landline. Clearly, I need to get rid of it because it's only spam every time it rings. Sorry about that. I have found, and this is particularly true for our smaller offices, but for instance, the Utah Minority Bar Association, a great place to gather for those small solo firms that don't have that critical mass. We do have, for instance, it's important for us, we do have what we call diverse network groups. Companies would call them ERGs, employee resource groups, for our Black, our Latinx, our Pride, including allies, our Pride Network, our Asian. We even have the Women's Forum has a new parent group. There's a new mommy group. There's a new working parent group, all of those. But a lot of a lot of firms and governments and organizations don't have that critical mass. And it's so important to have that community and sense of belonging. And so, for instance, the Center for Legal Inclusiveness here in town just realized that, there might be one Black lawyer at this firm, one at that one, one at another, and has brought them together in the community because they don't have that ability to get together and within their companies and their firms, and to have someone to look up to and to have someone to just be a support to. And they have added as well in-house lawyers. They're inviting government lawyers as well. And I think that that's really important where you don't have that critical mass.
Yes. Anyone else? I'll just dovetail on that. UMBA partners with law schools, and they also work to develop sponsorships and scholarships for to keep that pipeline going. And of course, many of the Utah offices are contributing to helping that pipeline exist and be maintained. And so those are some of those partnerships, community related, that are important to this effort. You're also seeing, I think, an awareness by the by state government in how our judiciary looks, right? And who is on the bench and who is getting interviews to be on the bench. Because if you don't even get the interview and you don't get a chance to meet with the governor, you don't have a chance to be selected. And so these are all things that are important in our state's growth, and for people to see themselves in a particular role of judges, right? They have to feel like the judicial system will be fair to them and is inclusive. And so recognizing that our judiciary, how it looks, is an important part of that conversation. Well, let me ask you this question. There are challenges to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I guess what I am interested in understanding is what are you guys doing to address those challenges? So, what challenges have you seen, and what efforts have you taken to overcome those challenges to be inclusive?
Well, we're down here in Nephi, and there's not a lot of diversity as far as racial diversity. So I know that something that they have done before I got here, which I've been down here for a year, is they did reach out to the law schools and made it an opportunity where there could be a minority that has the opportunity to come and intern in the office and that has that support, able to ask questions, just kind of a connection to maybe be mentored. What questions do they have? What support do they need? And I think that was really productive and helpful, but it's definitely the struggle down here where we are.
On the recruiting side, to that point, Misty, a lot of our communities are not racially, ethnically, or otherwise diverse, particularly the legal profession, right? And one of the initiatives that we have that just launched last year, we piloted following the summer of 2020, realizing that for some reason, a lot of Black lawyers, we get a lot of people coming, as Utah is getting, from all over the country. And we continue to say to headhunters and others, we would love to have diverse candidates and so forth. And oftentimes they'll say to us, they're not interested in coming to your state or to your jurisdiction. And so what do you do? So there's a group that formed called the Denver Law Firm Coalition for Racial Equity. And it's 5 law firms, the 5 largest Denver-based law firms that got together, and we're recruiting together. Right? Normally we're competitors and you never would do that. But for instance, it's called Practice Denver, but obviously we recruit for other offices like Salt Lake and our other jurisdictions. And we went, for instance, just to Chicago, and there's a group called the Chicago Area Law School consortium. And they invited us to come and talk to all of the students, and they put the word out, and we all sent out liaisons, and we went, and we had law students come from all over. Those kind of things to kind of it's almost like a chamber of commerce to try to get more diversity into our communities, or to get people to know that those who are in the communities, oftentimes they don't go to our organizations or our firms. They might not think it's a friendly place, like they don't see themselves as belonging.
No, I think so.
I think someone needs to mute that. There he goes. So there are different things that we do in terms of challenges internally, Ross. I think for us, I think one of the challenges is consistency, right? Like any firm, any company, any organization, certainly not just a legal profession, you're only as good as your team. Some people are better mentors, some people are better supervisors, some people are not. So we do put some kind of suggestions and frameworks and processes in place because we can do that because we're a little bit bigger. We have what are called diversity lieutenants. All of our practice groups has a partner that's looking out for our women and diverse lawyers, looking at the hours, making sure that they're not falling through the cracks. So those are some of the things that we've been doing, and it works. And they also get to know those lawyers just to have an additional touch point.
Anyone else on this question? Well, let me say this, in our community in Utah, there is an effort that is coordinated amongst businesses as well as the University of Utah to bring in HBCU students into Utah to give them work opportunities so that they get to know the Utah community, and they work with the Utah Black Chamber to make sure that there is a network of support there. And so I think, reaching out into other communities, bringing people in, giving them an employment opportunity. Now, these are not lawyers, these are more in the business circles, but it shows them who we are. Because what I will also tell you is people say, well, there's no diversity in this city or in this state, and it's simply not true. And it is a matter of connecting them and helping them. What I'll say, this is actually a notion from those that immigrate to Israel, but to help give them a soft landing. That is to say, how do we absorb people in the Utah community and make introductions quickly and help them find resources so that they say, oh, what a great place that I now have my own community that I am happy to be a part of. So I think that there are some things going on in Utah that we need to be proud of. Let me invite the audience, if I might, to weigh in with putting some questions in the chat. I think it's appropriate to ask our panelists what questions you may have. And I'll also note that going back to an earlier piece on the gender inclusion, we do have really strong strength and leadership in women-owned law firms in Utah. And it isn't that you have to be with an office of any sort. You can create your office. And certainly we see a lot of leadership in those spaces as well. And it's a way to show that strength. And by the way, there are associations in the legal community that are dedicated to helping those small firms, minority firms, women-owned firms grow, network, excel. And another thing to think about as a majority firm is looking to partner with those smaller firms and figure out ways to be collaborative. Let's see if there are questions.
We have lots of questions.
Oh, good. So a question says, I've observed that diverse people who come to Utah often do not feel comfortable in our not very diverse communities. And what can we do to support them and make them feel more comfortable? A question we were kind of just hitting on, but what are some practical ways your firms or your offices have done to make sure people are feeling included?
Yeah, one thing I just wanted to say in terms of the issue about how, when people come into our firms, when people come into our state, how do we help? And I think, there's some really wonderful practical ideas in terms of helping people find community. But I also just think really thinking from internally in your own office culture, thinking about how to be an ally. Like I said, I have had some male colleagues who've been really great. Usually when I've had some very difficult interaction with opposing counsel, and sometimes it, sometimes it seems like it could be based on my gender, especially when, interacting with my male colleagues, and just having someone there to support you and say, I see this and this is hard and that's not okay. And, I'm going to stand up with you, just makes you feel so much more supported, not alone. And, people are complicated, things are complicated, having new types of people in the community can be complicated. And sometimes people are going to say things out of, maybe because it's a true lack of understanding, or maybe sometimes people are going to say things because maybe they do have a discriminatory animus. And I think as you're looking at how to welcome people in, thinking about how to support them and say, I see you and I'm validating what you're going through, is just a really, really important step for people, and can make all the difference in terms of feeling like you're on your own, versus feeling like you have a really good team around you. So I don't know how to actually like quantify that into like a policy or strategy. But I do think that's something that folks should be considering.
Marianne, it's funny you say that, because one of the complaints that used to always happen with unconscious bias, unconscious bias programming can backfire if you give them all the programming and then you don't give them any tools when they walk out of the room. They're like, oh, gee, thanks. I have all these unconscious biases. Now what do I do with them? And you don't teach them how to be an ally. We actually just had a program, because it's Pride Month, called Everyday Allyship, and it applies across all types of allyship. And giving people those tools and recommending, here are the ways you can be an ally. You have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. We're all going to have oops and ouch moment. Treat everyone with grace, give them the benefit of the doubt, but at the same time, step up, interrupt, say something, support them in a meeting. If you're in a meeting and someone talks over someone else, bring it back to them, give them credit, talk to them offline, someone else, if it's uncomfortable, if it's for instance, a person of, power, when there's a power dynamic. So there are all different ways. And I think allyship is one thing that is crucially important, particularly in communities that are not as diverse.
Absolutely. And I think that's such a good point. And, I think also just being open within your leadership to things that may feel hard or like critiques. Even in my own office, this was quite some time ago, there, I would say our language today, although a lot of people are focused on kind of making sure our language is appropriate, we still use a lot of mental health terms in everyday interactions, where I would hear people in the office say things like crazy, or like, that's insane, or, that's, especially for where we work, that's not wonderful, but you also have to think about how that feels to other people in your office who may not have disclosed something. And so I actually just gave a presentation to our office on, look, I know this language is really common in our vernacular. And I know that this is something that we go to because it's just kind of like built in, and it's not necessarily coming from a discriminatory place, but it's a really unwelcoming thing. And, I at least in terms of those interactions, just really appreciated how everyone in my office, this was quite some time ago, but how everyone in my office really took that to heart. And even if they did have slip ups, I was able to say, I really appreciate you thinking and trying and changing your language. And I don't hear those things anymore. And it didn't, people really open to that feedback.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's a question, any suggestions or ideas on how new attorneys or junior associates at a firm can encourage DEI? And again, it can't just be a once a year thing. It's got to be, so for instance, now, since I've gotten there, anytime a new lawyer joins the firm, and I just had orientation yesterday, we have monthly orientation, DEI orientation. this is why DEI is important. This is what you can do. This is your role. This is how we can help you. This is why it's a good thing. Just from the get-go to say, this is why it's important to us. This is why it's a core value. And just repeatedly hearing those things and explaining to them. It makes it easier if you're a junior associate. Let's say they said, how do you encourage that? Find the allies, find people. And then you got to do the whole, what's the business case for diversity? We know the business case for diversity, right? So you have to sell that in if it's not, let's say, a priority, and explain to them why diverse teams are better and they're more profitable and your clients care, and just makes for a better workplace culture, because quite frankly, this next generation of millennials and Gen Zers, they demand it as well.
I think that is a really important thing to keep in mind. Clearly, this question is someone who cares about it, this work, and maybe isn't seeing their office being leading as much as they'd like. I would encourage collaboration amongst peers, right? If it's uncomfortable to be the person raising that, and you're in a smaller office, hopefully there's 2 or 3 others that would weigh in. The fact that Euclid has this program that helps firms to think about it. And look, I hear a lot of people say, we don't know where to start, or they seem to apologize because of their lack of diversity. And what I try to remind people, because, Utah hasn't been traditionally diverse, but the diversity is coming. 24.5% of our state is ethnically diverse. And by the way, again, that has all sorts of intersections, right? So understanding that it's an opportunity for talent, for customers, for clients, for community building, that I think our profession tends to be interested in, right? We care about how the courts are reflective of justice and how our community is being inclusive, because we know how important it is in a macro way. So, look for ways to collaborate, lean into these organizations that exist to be of assistance, call on practitioners like myself who are here that have worked with companies to give guidance or suggestions. And sometimes firms are ready for more formal relationships and sometimes they're not. But the fact that the question is being asked is important. And I can tell that it's out there amongst others as well. Any other panelists want to weigh in, or maybe we could go to another question?
I would suppose the only other thing I would add, I think there's so many business cultural reasons that are really beneficial to be doing DEI and to be, focusing on this. But I also just want to say, I'm a plaintiff's employee attorney, and I also see the side when it goes wrong. And that really can get, that could lead to a lot of time and cost, litigation. And, sometimes I'll see sometimes employers say, of course we would never do this or that. But then my client has autism and they'll ask me in a deposition, don't you think he's really weird? And it's well, weird is your coded language for discrimination. So, I think these are things that are important culturally and for values, but there is another stick out there aside from the ones that you have internally. And so I think, also when there's efforts at the legislature to shut down DEI, that's actually really difficult for employers, because that's how you prove that you're remedying harassment or discrimination. And it shows how, you as a company, you as an employer are taking efforts to make sure that you're not engaging in those practices. So they're really important on it's not just all warm and fuzzy. There's also a very practical reason to be doing this. And that's also just to, ensure employees' rights are protected, and that you as a company are saving yourself a big headache from, potential liability.
That's a very good point in the Utah conversation about restricting DE&I applications in higher ed and maybe in private sector. There was a question asked about offices with offices in more diverse markets and using those markets to introduce Utah as a place to build a profession. I'll tell you, Goldman Sachs is a great, for instance, of this. We are seeing a lot of diversity downtown Salt Lake City in young professionals that are coming here because these individuals want to work for Goldman Sachs, and Goldman Sachs is telling them, we have opportunities for you to be part of our Utah office. And it's really helping people see our community, understand the vibrancy of it, the opportunity of it. And with all the cranes going up around our community, you're seeing interest in people being here. So I think it's a great suggestion to invite people as you have the opportunity to interview in other states, to think about other offices. But I'll also say it's also incumbent upon our offices and our employers to go to where diverse communities are more diverse, right? If we're only looking at schools in Utah and we don't yet have that pipeline at its maturity with diversity, there's opportunity for us to be looking elsewhere. These historically Black colleges and universities, or Hispanic serving institutions, or others, right? Like there are places we can go to be encouraging and welcoming and purposely, intentionally inviting people to get to know our community. So I do think that's a great suggestion. One of the questions—
Ross, can I chime in on that
Please,
one
please.
piece? Ever since, there's always a silver lining, and the silver lining of the pandemic is that it has taught all of us how to work like this. I didn't have to fly to Utah. And we really use for our offices that only have, let's say, for a single Black lawyer or a woman in an office with no women partners, let's say, the opportunity to connect them virtually across our offices. We do a lot. Everything we do pretty much is hybrid. You can join so that people from other offices can join. They can get to know people. You can use, as you said, where you have populations that might be more diverse to connect. And the same thing outside in the community. So I would say fully take advantage of this hybrid environment to connect people.
Very good point. I also wanted to just make reference, people are providing questions and also links to resources that people should be looking at and looking to. They might help answer some questions or provide additional resources for us to be using. I am waiting for more questions, and so let me invite the panel to respond to this question. However, we often talk about this work being a marathon, right? With no end, right? We don't actually ever get to the point where we don't have challenges in this space. But I guess I want to know, where do you see, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging? Where do you see this conversation and our community successes in 5 years from now? What are we doing better? What are we not having to spend as much time on? And what does that look like?
For me, I think it just starts with a conversation. We're having those conversations. People are willing. People want to change. People want to reach a hand out and include people. I think that that's important. So I think that there will be, once that's recognized that, hey, Utah wants to make these changes. We want you to feel included. We want you to be here. I think that there will start to be more of that diversity, and there will start to be more of that seen in Utah.
I mean, I think just directing my comments specifically towards DEI on the issue of disability, I'm not sure I have such a rosy outlook. I think this is still just a really difficult profession to be in and have a disability. I think there's a lot of demands on time. There's a lot of stress that we deal with in our jobs. But I think one thing I just want to say about that is, again, when we're looking at the definition of disability, I think there's some cultural identities, and certainly like the autistic community, like they have a cultural identity as well as the deaf community. But also just in terms of, thinking about people, supporting people, the definition of disability under the ADA is it's a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits major life activity. You can have a qualifying disability that comes and goes. That's not necessarily like a lifetime condition. And I do think there are absolutely situations in which probably, many attorneys working in Utah are going to fall into that definition of disability, and we can offer them assistance through that. And it's not to provide them with some sort of special benefit, but allow them to continue their essential functions. I went to law school in LA, and, remember hearing a story about how one of the partners, who had a particularly stressful job, that they actually started offering in-office yoga for him and other people. And that may seem like, wow, what a wonderful benefit. But I actually would say that's a reasonable accommodation, because he said, I'm so stressed, I can't keep doing my job. And he was doing such high level work and making so much money for the firm that they said, okay, we're going to bring in some services. Like, that's a reasonable accommodation. I think I just really want to, like, in terms of disability, encourage people to think about, like, hey, you are putting people under a significant amount of stress. I certainly have a significant amount of stress in my job. And frankly, some of the things that I work on require firsthand, exposure to people being harmed and things like that. And it's tough. And so, when we have like our attorneys, I'm trying to think about, like, hey, if this has been a really tough week, like, do you need some time next week to kind of cope with things so that you can pick up and keep going after that? So, I think there's a lot of, when people think about disability, they kind of think about, like, oh, these special people that have disabilities that maybe we need to help them with. And that's not the case. Probably you all know people with disabilities, or maybe you've had a qualifying disability. And it's just about providing equal opportunity, a level playing field, and making sure that people, like, can meet all those requirements. I'm not saying lessen requirements for people in any way, but I am saying think about the supports that can help folks. And, I see from my work as a plaintiff's attorney that when you have an organization that is just a little bit more, like, kind of rooted in past ways of how we've worked, that's where a lot of conflict comes up. And I'm just really happy we can have and support, people in my office who have disabilities or have loved ones with disabilities, and, like, they're fantastic and work really, really hard. And I've been on Zoom calls with them at 3 a.m. I myself at times have used reasonable accommodations, and, like, I work really hard. So, I just want to say, like, in terms of disability, I think that's one area that we as a society still struggle with. And again, these are not special benefits and privileges. It's just helping people to work to their full potential.
And wellness, right, Marianne? I mean, wellness, it's not a disability. I mean, I think every single one of us, the stress that we have, wellness is so important. And it transcends a lot of the questions when we talk about the question about single women, the questions about people with children, the questions about the wellness component. And one thing we haven't talked about is working in a hybrid environment, and that women and diverse lawyers prefer, actually, oftentimes they say, to work remotely or virtually. We like to say not remote, because one, you're just juggling so many things, but also you're not facing so many of the microaggressions or inequities, and it's easier, we're more relaxed. But at the same time, we're losing out as a profession on, someone said, shouldn't we go to dinner more? Absolutely. You cannot substitute the things that you learn in this relationship business by being in person. Now, you don't have to do everything in person. And we have this great program about what should be in person and what should be hybrid. Sometimes if it's collaborative, if it's feedback, if it's creative, you want to have those in person, versus other times people may want to, if they're just putting their head down and going through a stack of documents, maybe they're better off doing that at home because it's too distracting at the office. So wellness is something that we have to take into account everywhere for retention across the board.
Well, we've had a few people notice that we've gone over the hour and that was intentional. We had scheduled an hour and a half, but we understand if people had to go, and I think Michelle referenced that at the beginning. But with that, maybe let's have one final, thought as we wrap up today in this conversation. And let me thank all of the attendees. This is such a great response. This is the second conversation we're having. We're going to have another conversation around this topic near the end of the month. And so please be on the lookout for that. This one will be in person at the Utah Law and Justice Center. But if we could, please have some final thoughts from our panelists. Phyllis, do you mind kicking us off?
Sure. I think it's fantastic that you have this as a series. As I said, it can't be a one-off. When you asked what progress have we made, I do think that for the most part, we're no longer having to explain over and over and over the business case for diversity, why clients care, why we're doing this, all those kind of things, and we can dig a little deeper. Right now, I think that we are digging deeper, and we do realize that as a legal profession, I personally don't like change, right? That's an attribute of a lawyer sometimes. And I think that basically we have to challenge ourselves sometimes, and we have to if we can do it together, I think we will be a lot better off if we can do it as a community.
For me, I know that what Marianne was saying, that she said she doesn't have such a rosy view, but I do think that it's baby steps, right? It's every step that we make is an improvement, whether that's in people that we interact with in their lives, everything that we have. So I think starting the conversation is important. We understand it's going to be baby steps, but every little thing that we do, it does make a difference. And so that would just be my final words. Try to make a difference in yourself, try to make a difference in your workplace, and that's going to make a difference in somebody's life.
I guess for me, I learned a ton today. Thanks for letting me be a part of this. But the thing for me today, I guess, that I'm taking away is the importance of just being kind, being patient, and trying to think outside the box. Try to solve problems. Try to look at ways you can do something differently, so that we don't get stuck in the rut. Because the excuse that we made in Utah for a long time was, it's Utah, we're not diverse, right? It's never going to change, and we're seeing change. So keep thinking outside that box and find ways to solve problems, and we'll keep making progress.
Yeah, and I will just give a really big plug for Euclid's certification program. I think it's a really great program. They offer a lot of support. They do a lot of training. It really helps you to kind of go through, take stock of where you are as a law firm. And I know, I've done some CLEs with them, and it's really great. And if you're looking for some tools of where do I start, I think Euclid is a wonderful place to go. And then I also just, like I said, our organization, so it's Disability Law Center. We're at disabilitylawcenter.org. We do have, like I said, videos there on reasonable accommodation specifically. We have things on leave. We have things on work from home as an accommodation. We really go over more in those videos, kind of the legal requirements, current case law, things like that. We also have one just on the reasonable accommodation process and what that looks like. So I think those are really great if you're looking for just some technical assistance. Our office can also provide some technical assistance. And I do just think, like, the effort, being involved in Euclid and everything, there's a lot of people here in the community that are really focused on how to make things better. How do you create a more inclusive environment, which I just really appreciate. And we're just thrilled to be a part of those efforts. And I probably should not be giving my view, my outlook, when I am a plaintiff's employee attorney, and so I only see the worst situations. But I do think there's still probably, within the area of disability in Utah, there's probably more we could focus on in those conversations. But I just really applaud the efforts of everyone in the state to make sure that DEI efforts are so important to our community. It's a really wonderful change, and I'm from Utah, so I can even see the changes in our state.
Well, Marianne, that's a great reminder, right? We should do the things because they're the right things to do. And also importantly, if we heed this advice, if we take these examples, we avoid being reminded through litigation that we should have done things differently. Michelle, thank you for gathering us today with the Utah State Bar. I'll let you conclude, but just let me thank the panel again. Thank you for letting myself and Inclusion Strategies be part of this. But Michelle, please.
Indeed, gratitude is the perfect way to close this circle. We appreciate all of you for attending and joining us. The value of CLE is conversation. It's about being dynamic. It's about asking questions. And sometimes it's even just about hearing a message that you may have heard several times, but then suddenly today you hear it with different ears and you see folks with different eyes. And there's something lovely about the idea that we can continue to learn as lawyers, that this is a profession where we learn all the time. We're students of language, we're students of the law, we're students of culture and relationship. And I am grateful for the mentoring that happened at today's CLE and the continuation of this series. We hope to see you at the third installment, which is June 27th. We welcome you to all of those events. The fourth session is not yet scheduled, so watch your inbox. We'll update you as that is scheduled with our faculty. And I want to invite anyone who participated in today's session to feel free to email the CLE department for any of the resources mentioned or to reach out to any of the faculty members assembled. Some beautiful resources were shared in the chat, but were also shared by our faculty. And I just want to appreciate the level of expertise and the authenticity shared in the conversation, because I think that really matters. Our work is about building relationships, not fracturing them, despite the common view that lawyering is about dissipating relationships. We're really not in that industry. We are really about helping to heal and find more about what unites us than divides us. So I thank you for this conversation and look forward to seeing you at the next installment, either of the summer convention next Thursday or June 27th of this series. Thanks so much to all of you. Be well.